Ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome my very special guest, Professor Wendy Lynn Lee, philosophy professor, uh, sociologist, and philosopher. A woman who's paid a lot of attention to the trajectory of American politics, American thinking, so-called, and the American political scene. We've come together for a discussion as we are approaching this election of, well, let's say the completion of the presidency of Mr. Biden and what comes next. So we're here to talk about what comes next. Professor Wendy, welcome. I'm so pleased to see you, even under these benighted circumstances. I want to talk to you about some of the interesting aspects of this pending presidency. You know, it seemed to me I heard nothing. I heard nothing. As attentive as I am to politics, I heard nothing about the invasion of Panama. I heard nothing about the annexation of Greenland or Mexico or Canada, and certainly nothing about the importance of these acquisitions in the Trump grandiosity as we approach this. Like, tell me, did you hear any of that? Because I certainly didn't, and I know you're attentive.
So I know that Trump had been hand waving at Greenland back in, I think, 2019 or thereabouts. Um, but, no one took him seriously because it was stupid, right? Because we have absolutely no rights to Greenland, right? But now it's clear that the tenor and tone of that talk has changed. And certainly it seems to be taken more seriously. And it's genuinely hard to gauge what exactly the purpose of that is, other than national security. I mean, that's the rhetoric around it, is national security, right? I don't buy a word of that, right? I just think that this is territorially expansionist, right? And that's it. And same goes for Mexico. Actually, we ought to just give Texas back to Mexico as opposed to the other way around. And the whole idea, I saw this on X, used to be Twitter yesterday, that the Canadians want to become the 51st state because it's so much better to be an American than a Canadian, is like ludicrous. That's like imagining Canadians saying, "Oh, I don't want no health care." Right? No, who need healthcare, schmelthcare? Who needs it? Right? Which is just ludicrous. And I find myself often now just kind of searching for words, or trying to make up new neologisms, new words to try to describe how breathless some of this is. And some part of me, it's bigger some days, smaller on others, but some part of me thinks, maybe the only way out of this crisis is to go through it, for it to get so bad that people finally start to come to their senses. And I recognize that what I'm saying is the circumstances have to get to where there's so much suffering, right? And that's easy for me to say in my cozy little study with my cozy little dog, with access to a computer, right? And I get that. And I certainly do not wish suffering for its own sake, but I sometimes wonder if there's any way out other than through. Like when I hear actors like the super MAGA James Wood yesterday. I got a glimpse of him on CNN, who I think has normalized a lot of this crisis now. I have become increasingly angry with mainstream media for treating like late stage capitalism, as if this was somehow a normal state of affairs. But in any case, saw James Wood, right, who is an avid, just vicious climate change denier, right, who's now lost his house to the Los Angeles fires, right, blame Gavin Newsom, right, blame California water policy, right, a state that has been in drought for years and years and years, a drought that has been clearly accelerated by the climate crisis, right, indisputably so, right, and yet I watch him, irony of ironies, as climate change denier, right, speak as if it made perfectly reasonable sense to talk about how it's, right, some political figure's fault, right, that his house burned down from this immense tornado of a fire. And that just kind of epitomizes, it's like, there's the metaphor, right? That just kind of epitomizes this idiocracy, this fascist idiocracy that we now live in. And the day that Trump comes back into office will not be particularly remarkable, because we're already living in this, right? It's just going to become accelerated, perhaps, right, and just kind of uglier by the day, such that we will just see more of what we've already got, and it's already wordlessly catastrophic.
Let me ask you this. One way of looking at this, and I've heard it, and I'm sure you've heard it as well, is that this is a misdirection. All of these invasions and would-be resource grabs or liberations of Panama and Canada, etc., that this is a misdirection approach. That this is, watch this hand while I rob and steal and privatize all the goodies. Watch this hand. One other, I think, convincing argument as well is that this is about ego aggrandizement. That what's important is we're so good and we're so big and we're so wonderful that everybody should want to come to us. And even if they don't want to, we know better. That same mentality that says we're going to protect women whether they want to be protected or not, so-called protection. Yeah. So in that spectrum, do you lean more toward the, oh my God, I've got a Habit candy store sort of mentality, or is this really misdirection? How do you weigh that out?
I think these could both be true. I think that it could be usefully a kind of rhetorical strategy of misdirection, right? Look over here, right? Well, we gut what remains of Biden's environmental policies and we drill, baby, drill. And at the same time, right, they're entirely consistent, or so it seems to me. This could be egomaniacally expansionist. Certainly, it's got this kind of, this we know better whether you know it or not that we know better. It's a little bit like the imposition of Christianity on the indigenous peoples of the Americas. Well, if it requires some genocide to get this accomplished, right, at least your soul is going to go to heaven, kind of thing. So I don't see those two things as particularly at odds with each other, because they still ultimately advance what I think Trump really wants ultimately, which is for everything to be branded Trump. Right, Gulf of America, is a Trump brand. Right, I saw a post on Twitter this morning from this far right MAGA guy, Gunther Eagleman, right, who's just this kind of spout of hatred about how, heck, he said, the Australians are not armed. What? What are you talking about?
Another thread that you struck on that I'm going to draw you out on a little bit. The religiosity, and of course it's all faux religiosity. It's imperialist theology um, the strain of this, I just find completely shocking. And for a bunch of yuppie millionaires to pretend this veil of Christianity over their brutality is just I, I don't understand how so many people who are nominally Christians can just accede to all this.
And I have thought about that some, especially in light of the death of Jimmy Carter.
Ah,
Because if I were gonna point right, and I'm not a Christian, and I am a garden variety atheist, but if I were gonna point to an example of a kind of a symbol, a personification that really epitomizes what I take to be the fundamental values of Jesus, right? New Testament Christian values, right? It'd be Jimmy Carter, right? The first president I was old enough to vote for back in the day, and whom I have respected and admired for my entire life. Not because he was a perfect man, but because, as Biden put it yesterday, he was a man of character and he was a man of immense decency. And when you compare someone like a Jimmy Carter, right, and maybe even particularly in his post presidency, the humility and decency with which he carried out every day of the rest of his life, and Rosalind Carter and the family Carter for that matter, right? And you compare that, right, to the guy who's going to be sentenced today, right, as a felon, right, for in a hush money trial, right, and just the innumerable crimes that Trump has doubtlessly committed, right, and yet can be president again, right. The comparison, if anything, makes it difficult to make. It's because both claim to be Christians, but only one actually lived like the Christian that I see in the New Testament. And that was Jimmy Carter, not Trump, certainly not MAGA, right? Certainly not this contemporary incarnation of the Congress. And in many ways, not even Democrats as they jockey for position, right? Shifting ever further and further right, right? A motion that I think started probably at least as far back, if not further, than Reagan.
yeah, yeah. Um, the this veneer of religiosity that stands so athwart our entire civic philosophy, because that one of the things I think that is one of the highest values of American ethos or myth anyway is that idea that we can tolerate we are a generous people who can tolerate different religious views, different religious values. That to me has always been one of the bulwarks of the great American story. And to see it shattered so willingly, so enthusiastically, to hear Congress say we need to have a religious test about the
Yeah.
Christianity,
Yeah.
while simultaneously saluting and groveling before this horribly immoral or amoral man. It's just astounding.
I think amoral is the right word there. And I also think we have to wonder whether that bulwark was ever a bulwark. All right, where it is so easily shattered. Um, it may be that a better way to characterize America is as this, it was this grand, glittering, beautiful experiment. And that experiment is failed. It is failed. And we may think now that we still live in some, I don't know, thin veneer of a democracy, or that we still have democratic institutions that, however tattered, will ultimately hold. but I don't know that I believe that anymore. And I don't even know if language like, and we'll see, right? Language that we use to just kind of push the ball down the road a little bit, kick the can down the road a little bit. I'm not even sure that that isn't just kind of an escape mechanism that we tell ourselves now, because what we are facing is clearly a corporate, an oligarchy. It is autocracy, but it's really an oligarchy now, because it is a government of corporate interests that have no reason or obligation to take democratic institutions seriously at all. Right? The innumerable cartoons we now see of Trump bowing before Elon Musk, who is also now an admirer of what I regard as the contemporary Nazi party of Germany, the AfD.
Yeah.
You know, and the world leaders that Trump has had come to kiss the ring at Mar-a-Lago, right? From Italy, right? From Hungary. Soon, although it seems like he's been a little bit, I don't know, a little sneaky about it. His meeting coming up with Putin, right? No doubt will happen, probably even before Inauguration Day. There's nothing to stop this train now. All right, this train left the station in 2016. It probably left the station before 2016. All right, but we just didn't know. But yeah, I don't know, Rick. I don't know what the future looks like. Some part of me laughs really sardonically and cynically, right, and then goes out and you know, builds my survival garden. You know, and some part of me is a fighter, and some part of me is just despairing.
Another related topic in this same context is the complete exposure of and loss of innocence of our justice system that is now clearly on display as purchasable.
Yeah.
One law for the wealthy to, one law for the poor, plain and simple, unarguably, indisputably. And, you know, how many crimes does he do that he walks away from? What do they teach in ethics class? I have to wonder, you know, how do you with a straight face say, well, there is equal justice under law, when clearly on every news, even corporate news, it's so damn obvious.
You know, and I teach ethics, and I don't lie to my students in that way. I don't tell them that there's equality under the law, and they know better. They you know, they know that that's not true. I don't think that that's ever really been true. But you know what I'm really starting to wonder now is, I think maybe we know that that has never been true. It's just that it's in our faces now, like really in our faces now, in our faces in a way that is so crass and so inescapable, that what really upsets us the most is that we're not being given a veil, you know, is that we don't get to hide from it. It's as if what we're really mad about is that we just resent we resent having to know that there's no equality under the law. And we resent not having some flowery pretense to hide behind. Right? That's why we're really mad. It's not because it hasn't always been true. It's that we've always had various and assorted escape routes, you know, veils to hide behind, so that we just don't have to freaking look. But now there's no veil. Right now it's right there. It's right in front of us all the time, 24/7 news media, right? And it may be worse at Fox, right? It may be more crass at Fox, right? But is it really all that much better, right? When Joe and Mika go to Mar-a-Lago to, visit with the incoming ruler, or, Bill Gates, when even the people that maybe we thought we could kind of vaguely, sort of trust, we clearly can't, right? So in some ways, right, at least while Trump's in office, the one thing I can trust is that I know it's going to be an absolute catastrophe. At least it's not being hidden from me anymore. Like, I know, right? I know if Tulsi Gabbard, right, and these absolute groveling rubes of incompetence end up in power, I know what I'm getting, right? And it sort of tells me what I need to do, like things I need to do here to like help protect my family. If that's even a possible thing, right? I mean, people in Los Angeles are waking up this morning with nothing. They can't protect their families from anything, right? And they get to look at James Woods, blame Gavin Newsom.
Let me jump for a second from the macrocosm to the microcosm. I heard a very interesting story by a friend of mine, and we were just talking about law and justice, and he lives in a semi-developed area of Hawaii, and he had trouble with a neighbor. The neighbor was a squatter, a person who made their living via selling crystal meth, and simply because he wasn't an ally of hers, she began to harass him. She'd set fires at his place. She took pot shots at him with a gun, and he called the police innumerable times.
Mm-hmm.
They would tell him that they can't go even talk to her because she has a gate in front of her driveway. He said, but there's no fence that the gate is connected to. It's just a gate by the driveway. They said, okay. No, there's a law in Hawaii that we can't go talk to her because she has a gate, and therefore we're not allowed to go in. Well, long story short, she finally has not just fired a gun at him, but at others in the neighborhood. So finally enough neighbors called, and the police came out, and they said to my friend, now, he's a 70-year-old like me, but he's also a former martial arts person, so he's very careful about any kind of physical responses that he ever does. Mm-hmm. And anyway, so the cop said to him, well, why didn't you just get a gun and shoot her? And he said, wait a minute, what? You, the police, are telling me that I should get a gun and shoot her. He said, now let's walk down that path for just a second. So if I shot her, what would you do? And they, we'd arrest you. He said, now, you won't arrest her, but you are telling me that I should get a gun and shoot her and then I'll be arrested. And they go, well, yeah, that's our job. And he said, but how is that better? They go, well, it's not better, but we can just do something then.
So he has to be shot before they'll do anything. She has to kill him or maim him.
Yeah.
Well, that's just ludicrous.
Yeah. and it struck me as bizarre as it seems off the top of your reality. You see, this all kind of falls from the same kind of crazy way that law is being interpreted now, and the bizarre way, here there's so many reasons why they can't release the public documents on these the myriad investigations. Well, because there's Eileen Cannon, who is no longer in charge of the case. She's made a ruling. In what universe does that make any sense? And
in the universe that is oligarchical, right, where the very wealthy and very well connected, on a global scale, despite the fact that they claim to be anti-globalist yet expansionist, xenophobic, right, yet acquisitive. In that is the universe in which I don't think we use the language, it makes sense. I think maybe we use the language in which such nonsense can still be executed, can still happen.
Yeah, I actually heard pro-Trump people before the election say, well, he's the peacemaker. It's the Democrats that are the
Oh,
war people. And
right.
I said, do you not comprehend in the smallest way international relations, international treaties? We're helping the Ukrainians against a usurping government who wants to invade them. They didn't start the invasion. Russia started the invasion. And by arming the Ukrainians, as much as I am an anti-war person, an anti-violence person, I think arming someone to protect themselves is a peaceful act in its.
It's right. It's self-defense. And Ukraine is at least a wannabe aspiring democracy and member of NATO, which is, of course, why Russia hates them. But, of course, we're going to go to the side of Russia. We want Greenland, right? We want to invade Canada, right? So, at that level, there's some sense to be made, right? Our ultimate reasons may be somewhat different, but reasons, schmeasons, like who even cares? Right? Putin wants to resurrect not the Soviet Union, really. He wants to resurrect the Russian Empire, right? Before the Soviet Union, right? And there's this sort of quasi weird religiosity that's kind of soaked up in that too, right? I don't think Trump is an opportunist. I don't even think Trump is particularly an ideologue. And I don't think he's any particularly great Christian, right? He just plays that game, because it gets him voters, right? He's just an opportunist. And that makes him both scarier and less scary than figures like Putin, but different. But, are their goals ultimately still both expansionist? Yes. Right. So, we shouldn't be surprised whose side Trump takes, because it's the side he was always going to have taken, right? Because all he understands is transaction and branding and expansion for its own sake. And that's it. Right. And at some level, that's not that hard to understand.
Right. And one of the other interesting curiosities of this pre-inaugural foam is this concept of renaming the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America.
Yeah.
Talk about Pyrrhic nonsense. Is this to make him feel better? And I have a friend who's a meteorologist, and she was complaining, about the plans of getting government science and all that. And I said, you have to understand, he doesn't need meteorology. He's got a magic marker. It's okay.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he could rename all the states, Trump 1, Trump 2, right? The blue states are negative Trump numbers, the red states are fine. I mean, and some of that, I think, is just a kind of look at this shiny object over here distraction, right? Who's but we're so busy being stunned by its idiocy that maybe we're not paying enough attention, to what the real game is. But it's still all part of the same, egomaniacal, going to make the next 4 years or 8 years, right? Because there's already now this movement to alter the Constitution, right, so that he could run again in 2028. And that is genuinely terrifying. It's hard to imagine that actually happening. But then again, every time I say that, every time those words come out of my mouth, I'm like, I don't know. I do not now know what can happen and what cannot happen in this world.
I was looking online to see what was visible, because of course we know that the invisible below the waterline, what's going on the right is too massive and scary to contemplate. But to look at the above the waterline stuff, I saw a story about how this American First Policy Institute has now usurped the position of the Heritage Foundation as an extreme, more extreme right-wing think tank that's really got Trump's vacant stare. And I was looking at what they call their 10 pillars. Uh,
Uh-huh.
and these 10 pillars are starts with faith and politics do mix in America, and that the political matters because policy matters, and policy matters because people matter. Throughout the Bible, God has used His people in very anyway. You know the drill,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And a
and
lot of that language is in Project 2025 too, or language similar to it.
I downloaded all 990 volumes. It's so appalling. It's not only let's say bad. It's badly written. It's poorly
Mm-hmm,
thought out. But there's a lot of fluff in there and froth in there that for the people who are going to read a sentence here and a sentence there, it's adequate.
mm-hmm.
And
And they
there's
knew that, right? That's strategic, right? That's calculated. Right. And
yeah,
they know most people are not going to read it, or they're going to just, read the crib notes, you know, um, and, and yet at the same time, clearly the writers, the architects that we find in Project 2025 and the Federalist Society and the what has become of the Heritage Foundation, um, they're really the theocratic drivers who I think understand that Trump is simply manipulable to their own ends, right? And I think he understands himself that way, right? I think he understands that he is instrumental to their ends, and I think he's perfectly fine with that because it's consistent with his own ends, right? So long as he still gets what he wants, right? If they want to, swash a bunch of gold lettering God stuff all over it, he's fine with that.
the other thing that one of the latest outrages in my book is this phone call to the Supreme Court while he's got a decision in front of him.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
He, he, you
That
know,
we don't get, that we don't get, because we can't be outraged all the time. Like I can't be breathless all the time, right? And so that's just one thing, one set a few days. We've got a guy who shoots a CEO, right? We've got Luigi, right, who shoots the CEO, and it's a huge thing, and we're all breathless about it, and some of us are also kind of about that, but it moves to the 24-hour media cycle, right? And this is not really different from that in the sense that we just don't have the bandwidth to absorb so much, right? When you've also got to like get your kids ready for school and go figure out whether or not it's safe to buy eggs, or or like whether or not your community has bird flu in it, right? There's just, and I think they count on us to be overwhelmed all the time, right? Because then we're exhausted, and then they railroad us.
the knowing that outrage the libs is one of the top priorities of their agenda. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I think that we have to look at that strategically, as basically you just pointed out, that not only just marshal our forces, but kind of know when to ignore the latest outrage in terms of making sure we keep our eyes on the prize
Yeah.
and organizing some logical response, some if only in a self-preservation sort of way, in a community preservation kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask you, since you'd paid so much attention for some period of time on the right, do you think he's going to utilize these militia types to have himself his own private armed services?
Army.
What's your take
I
on that?
don't know. I don't know, but I think that that is as plausible, right? Militia types, meaning the Proud Boys. I think we will get a clue about that when he either does or doesn't pardon the J6ers, because many of the J6ers would be the members, right? Or the, organizing committee for that private army, right? And it's the Proud Boys, right? But it's also the 3%ers, right? There are a lot of other, right, smaller, more regionally orchestrated groups, right, that follow the same kinds of ideological lines. So I think the answer there is yes, but tentatively, depending on what exactly happens and with which J6ers, right? Because if he, for example, pardons Enrique Tarrio, right, who's, in for conspiracy, right? I think a 20-year sentence, right, on conspiracy to overthrow the government charges. He pardons Enrique Tarrio. That will be a really clear signal about the direction that he's going with respect to the construction of that army.
Uh, the one of the curiosities of our current condition, uh, for whatever reason, someone leaked out that, well, they're really still actively looking for the bomber who put bombs at the Democratic headquarters during the last election cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, it strikes me as so beyond absurd. Where the Justice Department, so terribly misnamed,
Mm-hmm.
who had just let this stuff string out for so long and not bother to raise a finger one is now what now they're going to pay attention now they're what this is a
Mm-hmm.
fig leaf to people who said, gee, whatever happened to the Justice Department? I remember when they actually used to do things. And luckily we know that he's only going to be dictator for a day. I mean, that's something we can
It's going
really
to be
bank
a
on.
long darn day.
And not one of those 24-hour ones, I'm afraid.
No, no, it's going to be like maybe an 8-year day. And, and I say that even kind of tongue in cheek because depending on all of the things that could happen over these next 4 and/or 8 years, what could come after Trump, right? I mean, I think we've got this kind of naive hope that then, like, oh God, it was the dark night of the soul, but it'll be over. But there are no reasons to believe that, because the damage to what remains of our democratic institutions may be so profound and so irrecoverable. And the damage to planetary resources like water, right? And arable soil, it may be so incalculably, just so irrecoverable that, you know, I don't, it's naive to hope that things are going to get better, even if if there's an administration who wants them to, because there just may not be the resources. There may not be the education any longer to put it back together. I mean, that it's when I think about it that way that, like, our grandchildren, that, it makes me sick to my stomach to think about the, Mad Max world that my grandchild, right, the Cormac McCarthy road world that my grandchild might face. I have long talks about exactly that with my son and daughter-in-law, and they have this they want to instruct and train their child in some survival skills at this point, so that he can face that world with at least a shot of surviving it. But, like, I can't even believe we're talking this way.
Yeah. I my wife and I talked a lot when we were raising our kids and they were little, you know, preparing them to treat people as human beings, teaching them geography, teaching them history, giving them an awareness of the world. At what point does it become counterproductive because you're preparing them for a world that doesn't exist anymore with sensibilities that are out of fashion? And I'm going to
Mhm.
put it that venally because those of us who grew up with real values of humanism, of
Mhm.
respect for human life, of respect for the environment, uh, I'm afraid I'm not prepared to relinquish those values.
Oh, I
And
will not relinquish them. And I will try to teach my grandchild not to relinquish them, but at the same time to understand that they may not be shared with a number of others, and that they're, and again, this is language I find myself like, I feel terrible even for using it, but living in a world of too many people who seem to be just stupid, right? Just so manipulable and so easily bribed, and bribed by so little, by so little, like, let them eat cake, right? And then that's sufficient. So yeah, yeah. I feel like we live in just this kind of endless contradiction now. And sometimes I just feel like kind of putting my family around me and just kind of huddling down in with my family and my dogs. But it's also not in my nature to do that, just to huddle, because I am a moral person and I want to say things. I want to write things.
yeah, I find in my writing, and I share it with an international group of writers, and they marvel that I speak of political matters and science matters and can describe some of these catastrophes with a little humor because I believe that humor is an important weapon in our survival kit.
Oh, very
And,
important.
and they'll say, geez, you talk about these really important things, but you tell us terrible things, but you say it with sense of humor. And I said, because we have to survive. We have to find ways of making it better.
Yeah.
And if the only tool we have is solidarity among a group of humane individuals, that's a victory. I'm prepared to make that a victory.
And laughter is critical, right? Because on the other side of laughter is suicide, or, yeah, it is suicide. And not prepared for that, not doing that. So no, I cannot imagine a time where humor is more important than it is right now.
One of the things that I hold hope with is incompetence. I'm a big fan of the right wing incompetence. I think had the people who invaded Congress those years ago, had they been competent,
Yeah,
we would be in a much worse condition than
I
we
think
are.
that's a very good point. And
And
maybe that's
I
part of what I mean by going through it as opposed to trying to find some way around this, because their own just egregious incompetence, right? Maybe that's what I mean by stupidity, is it may be the thing that ultimately sinks their ship and returns us to some kind of sense. Yeah.
in my worst moments of of black humor, I've often thought of the reason we haven't blown the planet up is sheer incompetence, and I praise it because it's too damn easy to blow up the world.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, with various and sundry nuclear arsenals, and stored in places with grotesquely incompetent people watching over them, of course. And
I
they still do that by accident, right? But yeah, maybe ultimately it'll be the incompetence of the evil, right? Or this just the plain stupid that will ultimately bring us out to the other side. I just hope there's something left to come out to.
yeah Yeah. Well, you know, I interviewed a thoracic surgeon, a head of a thoracic surgery department at a major hospital in Florida, and I said, you know, this was during the Obamacare affordable health care discussion.
Mm.
And
Hmm.
I said, I'm really curious. You know, I said, you're an intelligent person. You've been in what I'm going to call the medical industry for as long as you have. You've risen to the top of it. You have a perspective. I said, what's your take on medicine in the next few years ahead? Do you see a victory of social medicine, of access, simply access
Hmm.
to medical care, or do you see it going the other way? He says, well, I'll tell you one thing I see. I predicted within 10 years there'll be an end to hospitals. And I said, you know, the myriad things that I, with a vivid imagination, can think of, that's not on that list. And he
No,
said, well,
no.
you see,
What did he
see,
mean?
what he meant was that it, dealing with the insurance industry has made hospitals untenable. So the
Okay.
solution is not to fix the insurance industry, but is instead to abandon hospitals. And he said it's already happening. He said if you need a neurologist at our sprawling facility, a huge medical campus, he said if you
Hmm.
need a neurologist, we don't have them anymore. You have to go off campus to a strip mall somewhere where a neurologist has got another group larger than his medical staff is the staff of people handling paperwork for the insurance companies.
Oh, that none of that is at all
And,
surprising.
I said, oh my God. I said, but wait a minute. The logic where you pull medical professionals together, you pull an equipment pool together of expensive equipment, and with the personnel and the staff and the interaction, that synergy that happens greater than the sum of the parts,
Yeah.
how could a hospital not make sense? He said, no, it's impractical. It's not financially viable. And I came to find that out in person when my wife broke her shoulder in a fall in the bathtub. She broke her shoulder. We took her to emergency, and they said, well, we don't set bones here anymore in emergency. I said, are you absolutely kidding me? No.
Where did you have to
We
go?
had to go to a strip mall orthopedic surgeon to have him and his practice with its clerky attendants to deal with her fractured, broken bones.
All the while she's in pain.
Oh yeah. Oh
Okay, yeah, I see the point that he's making. And I think at the same time, just from the point of view of somebody who teaches bioethics, I'm not sure I think that the hospital as say a style of architecture is likely to disappear, but the hospital as an institution devoted to healing has long already disappeared. So I think what I'm saying is it may not matter very much whether the building is still standing. It may not matter all that much whether there are things in the building, right? People things, right? Robot things, right? Machine things, right? Surgical suite things. But what is executed in that building, what actually occurs in that building, has not for decades upon decades been directed at healing, because healing, the only healing that's ever approved by insurance companies is healing that does not cost them money, right? Because health insurance companies are not about health at all, right? They're about denying claims, right? Because they're about profit.
let me share one other little story to wrap up our insurance discussion. I was working in marketing at a internet company, and my job was to come up with the commercial argument for product X, whatever product X was. They would set before me, and now you got to sell it, you know, with the photos and the pictures and the text and the media. and I was invited to a meeting. We were going to start handling an insurance line through this web mart.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sitting there, and business meetings. Everybody's supposed to nod their head and agree and smile, and everything's fine, and we walk away. And later, you have to figure out what the hell went down because people don't speak in an intellectually digestible language.
Mm-hmm.
But during this meeting, I decided, because I'm that sort of person, to ask what the hell was meant when the insurance executive who's trying to place a product with our company, he said, well, there'll be a certain amount of breakage. Now, keep in mind, he was selling car insurance, health insurance, medical insurance, nurse insurance, car breakdown insurance. I mean, all these different lines of insurance. He said, well, there'll be a certain amount of breakage. And I suppose I'm waving my naive flag, but I had no clue what the hell he meant by breakage. I'm thinking, if it's a vase, it can break. If it's a machine, it can break. If it's a robot, it can break. If it's a computer, it can break. How the hell do you break an insurance policy? I don't get it. So I asked.
It's code for death.
Oh, no, it's worse than that. It's worse than that.
Even worse than that.
It's worse. Yes, breakage. And I asked, and everybody at the table laughed except me. And I said, clearly I don't get the joke. So what the hell do you mean by breakage? He goes, well, at a certain point, every once in a while, rarely, we will actually have to pay somebody.
Oh, yeah. So we break, right? Because we have to. I get it. All right.
And yeah. I thought,
gross.
What a business plan that you sell so you sell a service that you do not intend in any way to fulfill. And that's your business plan.
While you're making money, right, from the naive who are paying the premiums. Yeah.
And yeah. I thought, how absolutely savage.
Oh, savage is exactly the right word. It's very hard to see you in marketing.
Well, I had 3 kids to get through college.
I totally get it. I totally get it. Academia has also become a lot of marketing, and I've sat through many meetings that, while they may ostensibly have not been about marketing or about a business, still were. Still were.
But when I started, I used to have to write my cynical words first. Once I got them out of the way and I said the truth, then I could say bullshit. But first I had to get the truth out. But I was so appalled, so absolutely just gobsmacked, I guess is about the only way to think of it. I had never really thought of it that way. I mean, we were all cynical. Anybody who thinks about insurance understands that it's a scam. I used to joke and call it organized crime, but it never really hit me right in the gut so heavily as when I had to try to sell this junk. And I thought.
But such is the logic, right? I argue this over and over again in the books I write. Such is the logic of capital accumulation that, everything, living, non-living, animate, inanimate, is a potential commodity if it can be marketed or utilized as a resource. And that includes people, right? It includes non-human animals. It includes literally anything at all, including waste, including the climate crisis, right? Which is marketed now, especially ironically in places like California, to the wealthy, right? It's marketed to them to get them to buy things like fire foam, for example, right? There is literally nothing, including catastrophes, right, that cannot be marketed. These fires in Los Angeles, right? You just wait, right? The insurance companies are already preparing marketing campaigns to compete with each other for business, right? For in light of the possibility of the next round of fires, how they're going to make those fires, right, or the fear of those fires, profitable, right? Just like we see in the South with respect to hurricanes. So none of this. What's surprising is that we find any of this surprising anymore. Right? We shouldn't. I don't think we have an excuse anymore for being this naive. we have every reason, every evidence in front of us to understand exactly what capitalism is and what it will do, and that it is ultimately nihilistic.
Well, let me ask you one final question with something that I hope is not a vain hope for some positive final words.
Okay, let's try.
Do you think that in the face of what we can anticipate from Trumpian governance, will the Democrats find any soul to actually respond?
No. And I think part of that question is, will they find any guts? Will they find any courage? No, they won't. Like, a few will, but they won't be enough, right? And they'll be drowned out, right? And they'll be surveilled and they'll be harassed, right? And they may be ultimately voted out of office through fear campaigns. But no, I think if the Democratic Party had any kind of sense, that it would go full throttle, right, on its morally defensible claim, right? Like, just like we started out with, that human beings are created equal and that the law ought to treat them that way. They ought to go full throttle on the promises of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. But they're not. They're going to concede, right? We're going to start to see them. Well, we already are, right? To, oh, no more of that DEI. And, I mean, they're just going to, and they're going to say, we're just trying to pick our battles, right? That's going to be their excuse, right? Things are so bad, we have to pick our battles. And there's some truth to that, but they're going to use it as an excuse to not do anything. So no, I don't think they're going to grow a spine. I don't think they're going to develop a soul. And I don't think they have any guts.
Well, I'm going to say that I hope the light of democracy stays lit in enough hearts that it's.
Oh, I do too. I'm just not sure it will. It's in here, right? I know it's in yours, right? And I, sometimes I think I wait for, the Trumpy Gestapo, to come to my door and confiscate my computers because of the stuff that I write. And I'm not going to stop writing. Not even to protect my own family, because things have to be said, and because ultimately that does protect my family.
Yeah.
But I get it, that it's scary.
Yeah. Professor, thank you so very much for an intelligent conversation, which is so sadly rare in our world today. Thank you for your thoughtfulness. Thank you for your commitment to humanity. Thank you for all the teaching that you've done to light that spark in many, many hearts. Thank you, my friend.
You are most welcome. And thank you, Rick, for having me.
Have a good, my dear. Bye-bye.
Yep, you too. Bye-bye.